Today we are going to be making bread, and by me making I mean bacon bread. What I'm going to do today is make a traditional white styled loaf bread, and within it you can add all different types of grains or flax or oats or any sort of additive you want to make it a little bit heartier. I would really love to know how your bread turns out and compare it to what I'm doing here in my kitchen today. And if you're able to, I'd love for you to be able to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can continue to see more recipes and more variations like this. So let's get started making bread. Here is bread making 101, right? So you always have to start with a warmed liquid. This that I'm going to make today is going to be a dairy-free bread. A couple members of my family and my friends are dairy-free, so I've found that if I can sub in an almond oil, an almond milk, a coconut oil, that actually helps them and they're able to enjoy what I'm making. So what I've done here is I have 2 cups of liquid. I like to use half milk, half water. You can use water alone, you can use milk alone. This is an almond milk, and I've warmed it up in the microwave for about a minute and a half for 2 cups, and then the other 1 cup is water in here. So we'll go ahead and add this to our bowl. Now the reason that I warm it up is because the second thing you add is your yeast. This right here is 2 teaspoons, and I'm going to sprinkle that over the top of the milk. You want it to be warm so that the yeast starts to activate. The other thing that yeast needs is some sort of sugar. So instead of using just a regular white sugar today, I'm using a honey. You can use anything sugar-wise. You can use a raw sugar, you can use honey, you can use brown sugar. You could probably even use Caro syrup if you really wanted to, and that's all you had in your kitchen. Not sure how your bread would turn out, but I bet it wouldn't turn out bad. So I'm going to add the honey to my mixture. This is also, this is 2 tablespoons of honey. So if you're keeping count, that's 2 cups of liquid, 2 teaspoons of yeast, 2 tablespoons of a sugar. So now I've got that all in there. Next I want to add is oil. You must have the fat in bread. It makes it soft. So this is a coconut oil. I like using this. It's an organic. It makes bread very soft, and it gives it kind of a nice coconutty aroma. It goes along with the almond milk really well too. So that all goes in. So then you can give this a good stir. You're just kind of giving the yeast a little bit of a chance to start to work. Your oil will melt in the top of the pan. So the other things that I have sitting here, you have to add salt, but I will warn you that you can't add your salt too quickly because this can actually kill the yeast that's in your pan. So I like to just pour it down one side of my pan. I don't sprinkle it over the whole top of the active yeast. I want to incorporate it slowly. So I put my salt down the side of my pan. In this bowl, I have a combination of things, which I'm going to add first before I start diving into adding flour. Here I have oat bran, I have a golden flax seed, which has been ground, and then I have chia seeds. There's no reason why you can't add all these grains to your bread. It makes it a little bit more dense, but compared to the amount of flour that you're adding, it's really not going to change your texture a whole lot from this fluffy white goodness. So give this a stir. Now remember, your salt's on the side, and that will slowly work in. Now the other thing I'll let you know is that I basically had 1 cup of extra grains. That's like, 2/3 cup of my oat bran, and I had 1/3 of the flaxseed and maybe a teaspoon or 2 of the chia seeds. It doesn't really matter. That's actually the beauty of making bread. Oh, I missed some salt. Okay, so use your finger. I washed my hands. We're gonna be kneading bread anyway, so get dirty. So now what I have here is a bread flour. You can't use all-purpose flour. It just doesn't work the same. So I have bread flour that I keep in this huge, gigantic vault because that's how much bread flour I use. Yes, I'm one of those crazy people that have like 5 types of flour in their pantry at all times. You know, all-purpose flour, bread flour, almond flour, coconut flour, bran flour, I don't know, buckwheat flour. I think that's more than 5. Whatever. So... I'll let you know I switched over to using a spoon which actually has a hole in the center, and that's because I want to be able to develop the gluten in it a little bit more. It gives it a doughier, stickier consistency. So this here we have kind of all of our grains coming together. You want to kind of give it a good stir, start to develop that gluten, and I only add a cup of flour at a time because that seems to allow you to actually stir it in, and then you can tell how much flour you really need. Now you can make this recipe without any extra of those grains at all. You can make a basic white loaf bread with this recipe, and if that's your plan, then you'll probably only need a total of 6 cups of white flour. Now, since I've added all these grains, we're probably going to be closer to 4.5 or 5 cups of flour. So still beating it around a little bit. You can see that it's getting a little more sticky. Do I do this all by hand? Yes. Why? Because it's better. No, I don't have a bread maker. I don't even know what those things are or what they look like. So, still stirring. Yes, switch arms. It's not fair to work one arm more than the other. Plus it gets too difficult. The other thing that I want to point out is that I have a bowl with a silicone base. It does not slip like a lot of the other metal bowls that I have, and that I find really useful when I'm making something like bread. So in goes another cup of flour. Keep stirring. Clean off the sides of the pan. At some point this bread is going to get too dense that you are not able to stir it. And at that point you can switch over to kneading. If your bread's a little stickier and you're having trouble stirring it for whatever issue, you just need to remember to flour your hands and your knuckles, because when you start to knead, if you have them floured first, then everything won't stick to you. So another cup. Kind of getting to the kneading point for myself. Yeah. Okay. So what I'll do, I should take that off. Take off your rings, ladies, if you really don't want to get them dirty. So I'm gonna just kind of cover my hands with flour. And just get all up in there. So normally I would just let this all in the bowl and I would just kind of knead and work it, but for purposes of showing you, I'll take it out of the bowl so that you can actually see what I'm doing with it. So let me kind of sprinkle my counter here. Don't need a lot. Maybe a little bit more. And I'm just going to go ahead and dump this whole loaf of bread onto the countertop. Now we are going to return this loaf of bread to the bowl, so I want you to make sure that you kind of clean this all out if you are if you are wanting to dump it out on the counter because it's easier for you. Sometimes, because I'm a little shorter, I get a stool and actually stand up next to my counter, then I'm able to keep everything in the bowl without any trouble. I'll tell you that my girls love to make bread. And this kind of stems back from something that I got taught as a little kid. My grandmother watched us while my parents went to work. And I can remember her telling me how to make bread. I mean, she's the person who basically gave me this recipe, and I love it because this is something where I remember my siblings and we all made our own pan of bread, and out of it, this is going to make 2 loaves. So at the end of the day, we'd be able to take home 6 loaves of bread. But I suppose she kept a loaf or 2 of that. So I'm kind of giving this good pushes. You have to work in all that flour. And I'm using the heels of my hands right here because that is the easiest part to do it. So you can use your fists like this, but I find you're not able to get as much push into the actual bread dough. So I'm kind of just bending it over and pushing forward. So see here, I'm getting a little too sticky despite all my flour use. So I'm actually going to use a little bit more flour too. So just keep working. You are building the gluten elasticity at this point. You have to do that to be able to have good bread that rises and proofs the way you want it to. So just picking up all those goodies. So this is actually turning out to be pretty consistent throughout. You want an arm workout? Make bread. Every day. Well, maybe not every day, unless you eat a loaf of bread a day. But I don't know, some days in my house we do eat a loaf of bread a day. Depends how much grilled cheese you want to make. Okay, so this actually feels good. So let me make this pretty here for you. So if I push it, it kind of comes back. Did you see my fingerprints do that? Oh, that was a little sticky. So let me, a little bit more, but not too much. If you get too much flour in this, it won't rise. Let's try that again. Okay, so there's the loaf, right? If you push it, it like springs back. If you smush it, it springs back. And that's where you know you kind of have the right texture of bread. This bread is going to be a little more dense because I put all those extra grains into it. If you're making just solid white bread, just caution that you don't put too much flour in it. So, perfect, happy loaf. Love bread loaf buns. Okay, so remember how I said I cleaned out this pan? So what I want you to do is actually you need to coat oil over this loaf of bread. So I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil just in the bottom of my pan. Tiny, tiny bit. Tiny bit. There's not a lot in there. And then I'm going to set my bread loaf down on it. Another tiny bit of olive oil over top of it. And I am just going to roll this ball of dough around in all sides so that the sides of the pan are evenly coated with olive oil, and so that the dough itself is covered in olive oil. Because as it rises, I want it to be able to rise without any resistance. And by putting oil on the sides of the pan, it can actually move up the pan without any difficulty. So there it is. I might actually add a tiny, tiny bit more. You don't have to use olive oil. That's just the oil that I'm choosing right now. You can use just plain vegetable oil. You can use a coconut oil if you have it melted already, because that's what you used before. My coconut oil is just more solid right now, so I'm using olive oil. So there it is, happy oil coated dough ball. So what you need to do is put it to sleep. So what I'm gonna do is cover this in a saran wrap and set it in a warm area for approximately 30 minutes and just let it be. You don't touch it, you don't open the saran wrap. You can also use a towel, like just a kitchen towel if you have that in your kitchen. I like the saran wrap better because if there's any air movement in your house, it doesn't disturb the top of the loaf. So as it rises, it's not drying out that top layer. Instead, all of the normal, moist air inside this bowl is staying there and it's able to rise without any difficulty. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, as my 4-year-old says, put the bread to bed. So here is my plastic wrap cover that I, tucked our bread in with. So take that off. Don't throw it away. You're going to use it again. So look. Bread has essentially doubled in size sitting in this pan. So now all we're gonna do is go ahead and punch it down, okay? So I'm gonna again put some flour on my knuckles here a little bit just so I don't get sticky. Go ahead and give that a couple good punches. You can kind of roll it around a little bit in the pan if you'd like to. You do not have to recover this with oil. There's still enough oil on the outside of the pan so that it won't stick to it. So bread kind of pushed down. It's gotten much more elastic even since that first time. So now we're going to put it back to bed and let it rest again. So what I did was I made sure to fold this dough ball. You can even pick it up if you want to. You don't have to keep it all in the pan. This is your loaf of bread. It's your baby. So you can, hold it and pat it the way it needs to be petted. So, there. Perfect little round loaf again. We're gonna set it right back down in the pan and go ahead and recover it. So putting my plastic wrap back on, sealing the edges. Remember I said we don't want any of that air to get inside of here to not allow it to rise again. And I'm just gonna set it off to the side and let it do its thing for another 30 minutes. We've let the bread take a nap. Gonna uncover this again. Just set that off to the side. So you can see that this bread has again risen to be at least double its size. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and kind of cover our hands with some flour again, and we're gonna punch it back down. Take out your frustrations on your bread dough. Kind of roll it around a little bit more in the bowl. And then I am going to move it out to the counter so you can see what I'm doing. So a little flour here. And just let that sit there. Just gonna kind of work the air bubbles out of it. Knead it again. Okay, so then what you want to do is you need to split it in half. Some people will have those little, those bread cutters on purpose. I don't have one, and I don't really need one. So if you want to be exact and precise, what I would recommend is getting one of those little kitchen scales to kind of be able to tell, to be able to weigh them both out. Mine doesn't have to be an exact science because I'm just cooking for home. So I can basically pick both of these up and feel that I have approximately the same amount of dough in each of my hands. So I'm going to roll each one into a loaf. So you can kind of work, choose one to work with. I'm kind of tucking under this dough edge right here with my fingertips, squeezing it and using the counter as an edge, flouring a little bit extra if I need to make it this perfect loaf shape. Now remember, we have all those extra grains in this, so they create a not perfectly smooth surface sometimes. If you have no extra grains in this, you'll probably be safe to actually be able to roll this into a very pretty loaf. This may be my loaf. Not super pretty, but it doesn't have to be. Again, this is just learning how to make an actual dough from scratch, right? So here is my loaf. This looks pretty good. So I'm gonna let this sit right here. So just grab some vegetable cooking spray, and you want to spray all sides of your loaf pan. So I'll just do both of them at the same time because we're going to do 2. Make sure there's a good coating because you want to be able to flip these out of the pan when they're all done baking without them sticking. We'll put that one in there. Same thing with this one over here. Going to roll out the extra air bubbles, and then I'm going to shape it into this beautiful little loaf. That one worked nicer. Prettier, uglier, but it's okay. They're still gonna bake and be beautiful. So just take a fork. You can use whatever you want. I'm going to poke both of these bread loaves and just make sure there is no extra big air bubbles in them anywhere. Just to make sure that they rise evenly. Okay. And then I'm going to take these loaves, I'm going to cover them back up with this piece of plastic. Just gonna kind of seal the edges again. And then I'm gonna let them rise again until they about double in size. And then at that point, we'll be able to put them in a 350-degree oven for 25 to 30 minutes until they become golden brown, and then they will be done. So again, I have a cooling rack here because I like to be able to flip my bread out onto these things to allow them just to evenly cool down. I don't want to leave them in the metal pan because otherwise all the moisture that was created, if you let them sit in it, the bottom of your loaf of bread will actually get soggy. So I'll just do this one as an example. So we, coated the bottom of this bread. See how easy that was? There is no bread residue in the bottom of this pan, and that's exactly what you want. So perfectly golden brown loaf of bread. So I want to say dive right in, right? This is what you're all looking at, this loaf of bread saying, let's cut it open. I want to know what it looks like. I want to cut it now. Resist the temptation. You have to let this cool down. If you use a bread knife and you decide you need to saw into this, you let all of that built-in moisture escape. So let it cool down nice and slow, and then whenever it is not hot to the touch, like I can feel the heat radiating off of it. It just came out of the oven. So give it a break. You got to let it rest for I want to say at least 20 minutes. My father, you know what he does every time my mom cooks a loaf of bread? He comes out to the kitchen, he finds a bread knife, and he starts hacking at it. And you want to know what happens? Half of the loaf is smushed, and then he gets the best part at the very end. You need to wait 20 minutes. Okay, so whenever this is cooled down, I will cut it open and we will eat it with some butter or some jelly or however you want to have it, but you'll be able to see the inside here shortly. So I pulled this loaf of bread out of the oven after 30 minutes. It depends on how hot your oven is. I cooked this on a convection bake, so that is where the fan is blowing in the background and there's a little more circulation of the heat within the oven. If you don't have that feature, then you just have it on basic bake feature, and that works just as well. Sometimes Sometimes that actually works better. It depends on the kind of bread that you're making. I put this on convection because I like to see that golden brown top happen, and it speeds up a little bit. So I used a lot of grains, remember, in this bread. I used chia seeds, oat bran, and flaxseed, and that made this bread a little bit denser and took a little bit longer to rise than if you were to just make a regular white bread loaf. So that's probably why this took 30 minutes versus 25. And I'm actually gonna let it sit here, you know, for the next 20 minutes, and then we'll cut into it and we can see what the inside looks like. So voila, the bread loaf you've all been waiting for. Beautiful. Look at this. This is no humongous air bubbles. Some air bubbles are okay. You can see all the different kinds of grain in it. And because we've let it cool down appropriately, none of the top part gets smashed whenever I'm holding onto it and to cut it with a bread knife. So the best part about fresh baked bread is having real butter to go on top of it. You can do butter, you can do jelly, you can do, I don't know, apple butter is pretty good too. And then you can enjoy it. Thank you for watching. I hope that you learned something from this video about baking bread, and I'd be really interested to hear how your guys' bread recipes turned out.